Now joined by TSN hockey insiders Chris Johnston and Pierre LeBrun. So the Leafs have two key pending unrestricted free agents, Mitch Marner and John Tavares. Pierre, what stood out to you about how those two players handled the questions today?
Well, boy, if we're even wondering about it, what a contrast between John Tavares and Mitch Marner when they talked about their future. John Tavares mentioned that he met with GM Brad Treliving, that there was a positive tone as far as the chances of him returning, potentially depending on negotiations. I should mention Pat Brisson, his agent, saying a little premature yet. They're going to wait a few days before circling back to the Leafs. But John Tavares wants to stay. Mitch Marner, when asked by Chris Johnston here about his future, talked in the past tense about loving being a Leaf, but he's not ready to talk about his future, wants to go home and talk about with his wife. But he was really deflecting, essentially, on saying this is probably over.
And look, that was a continuation for me of what's happened all year long here. Mitch Marner at any point during the season could have signed an extension with the Leafs. The Leafs were open to that. They communicated that. He was deflecting at that time, did not want to get into discussions during the season, doesn't want to say now these couple days after the year's ended that he wants to stay. It's because he wants to go to July 1st, as is his right, and look at what's on the open market for him. And so, I think that for him, this was probably a tough one to get through because he doesn't want to come out and say that. I suppose you always leave open the possibility something comes along here that we're not expecting or that he's not expecting even. But, my sense certainly is that is his intention. And so already in the Leafs front office, they're starting to think of, well, what do we do if he goes? How do we deploy that money and all those sorts of things? So, well, they're going to spend some on Tavares. I think the writing's on the wall here about where it goes with Mitch Marner.
They're going to have to spend some on restricted free agent Matthew Knies, who had an incredible sophomore season. Chris, he was asked about the possibility of an offer sheet today. What do you make of what he had to say?
Well, assist to my colleague Pierre, that was his question. But, I think with Matthew Knies, he was pretty clear. I mean, he couldn't have been more clear. He loves playing here. That's all that matters to him. He's focused on it. And I think the spirit of the question really is, yes, there's offer sheets can be thrown around all the time. Teams can call the agents of players once it gets to a certain date, and they are restricted free agents formally. But the player himself has to want to sign that offer sheet. And so I think that's what's significant about the way Matthew Knies approached it is, he doesn't want to leave. The only reason I could see this ever getting to a point where an offer sheet comes into play is if negotiations don't go well and if they get stalled out. And maybe that's something that the Knies camp could use to either obviously get a better contract somewhere else or get it where the Leafs have to match it. But that certainly doesn't seem to be his intention at this point in time. And why would it be? He walked out of the University of Minnesota onto the Leafs lineup into the playoffs. He's been on their top line. He's having success. He's growing. And I think he's only going to have an more important role moving forward.
And let me just add this to CJ. Everyone's looking at the St. Louis Blues' successful double offer sheet on Edmonton last summer thinking this will be a new trend. That was the last offseason of the flat cap from the pandemic. The cap is going up dramatically. Teams are not going to be as cornered or trapped as the Oilers were last summer. The Leafs can handle whatever comes at them. They will sign Knies, I think, before July 1st anyway. But even if they don't, I just don't see why a team would look at the Leafs and say, we got them.
Well, and doubly so, if they don't re-sign Marner, as I just said,
right.
They've got more space than ever this summer. I don't see them getting in a spot unless the number is so goofy that they just take all the first-round picks.
In the wake of the Game 7 loss, a lot of talk from the Florida side about the pressure the Leafs are facing and how it hurt them. The Leafs were all asked about that today. Pierre, what do you make of what you heard?
Yeah, they downplayed that aspect. And, what really hit home for me on this day is that all the first-year Toronto Maple Leafs people, from head coach Craig Berube to Max Pacioretty to Anthony Stolarz to Chris Tanev, such a positive vibe now a couple of days later about their first year in Toronto, about this team being close, about this team, as Craig Berube said, learning a lot potentially from that Game 7 against Florida. Whereas, and I hate to say it, but the longtime Leafs, starting with Morgan Rielly and Austin Matthews, you could sort of feel more the strain in their voice about what happened again, about answering the same questions. Austin Matthews saying this one probably stings the most because they got a little more playoff scarring, in them, and they want to break through. So again, difference between being here a while and being here in the first year.
Well, and not a lot of upside to talking about the pressure if you're on the Leafs end of this. I mean, but it is a very real thing. And to bring it back to Mitch Marner yet again, he starts his availability today by going up to a reporter and thanking him for deleting something on social media that kind of crossed the line, not from the reporter, but, in terms of the reception that got. And so, this does hang over these players. It is part of it. I think some guys are built for it more than others. And, what can you say? It can go so great. Had they won that game and we're getting ready for the start of the Eastern Conference Final, the city's probably having a parade. And so instead it goes the other way, but that's just a fact of life here for the Maple Leafs.
First season for Austin Matthews as captain, and Coach Craig Craig Berube complimented him, said he grew into that role, and it was a tough year for Matthews. You know, he had the injury in training camp. He said it was a roller coaster. He did say today he will not need surgery, and he's confident he will be 100% next season.